Rain hammered down in relentless vertical lines, turning the streets into quicksilver rivers that reflected the blurred reds, yellows, and blues of traffic lights. The wind whipped along the avenue, sending umbrellas flipping inside out and sheets of water splashing onto the sidewalk. In the back seat of a yellow taxi, Daniel Carter sat slightly hunched, the collar of his jacket turned up, his gaze fixed on the window where streaks of water carved chaotic paths through the glow of the city. The cab smelled faintly of wet leather and pine air freshener. Somewhere under the rhythmic slap of the wipers, a jazz station played through a crackly speaker, the muted trumpet barely audible over the storm. Daniel's phone vibrated every couple of minutes with new emails, meeting notes, financial summaries, hotel occupancy reports, but he scrolled with only half his attention. The numbers were important, but tonight, the thing he was about to see with his own eyes mattered more. For most guests, the Grand Crest Hotel was a name that conjured images of quiet luxury, deep carpets muffling footsteps, fresh flowers on every surface, attentive service that anticipated needs before they were voiced. But for Daniel, it was more than an image. It was a creation. He had chosen every design detail himself when the chain was founded 15 years ago, from the particular warm tone of the lobby lights to the brand of chocolate placed on the pillows at turndown. What no one at the front desk knew, and what Daniel never announced on these visits, was that he owned the entire Grand Crest chain. His name might be on the corporate paperwork and in the boardroom minutes, but it wasn't printed on his clothing tonight. And that was by design. He believed in walking into his hotels like any other guest, reservation in hand, to see what really happened when a stranger approached the counter. No fanfare, no entourage, just the raw, unfiltered truth of how his people represented the brand when they thought no one important was watching. Tonight, that experiment was playing out in the middle of a rainstorm. The taxi slowed, then turned into the hotel's porte cochere, the covered driveway in front of the glass facade. The rain drummed on the roof above them like 1,000 small drums. A bellman in a perfectly cut navy coat was helping a couple unload luggage from a black SUV, his gloved hands careful with their monogrammed suitcases. Daniel's taxi, splashed with street grit, drew less attention. The bellman glanced his way, then returned to the couple without a wave. Daniel didn't mind. He wasn't here for special treatment. Not yet. He paid the driver, added a tip generous enough to make the man's tired eyes light up, and stepped out into the damp air. Even under the awning, the wind carried a fine mist that clung to his hair and darkened the shoulders of his jacket. He shifted his leather duffel, a travel companion that had seen better days, higher on his shoulder and crossed to the revolving door. The lobby was just as he remembered. High ceilings, polished walnut and cream marble, soft amber lighting that made the rain-streaked glass gleam like honey. A faint scent of vanilla and citrus hung in the air, the same proprietary fragrance used across all Grand Crest properties. The murmur of conversations floated from the lounge, where guests sipped cocktails while a jazz trio played something slow and velvety near the bar. The front desk stood like a command post at the far end of the room. Behind it, a young man in his mid-20s tapped at a computer, posture slightly slouched, attention divided between the glowing screen and the phone half hidden behind it. His uniform was crisp, white shirt, navy vest, gold name tag. But the distracted expression didn't match the elegance of the setting. The name tag read, Evan. Daniel walked toward the desk at a measured pace, the sound of his boots soft against the thick carpet runner. He placed his duffel gently on the marble counter, waited for the faintest acknowledgement. Daniel. Good evening. Checking in. Reservation under Daniel Carter. Evan looked up briefly, offered a thin smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and went back to typing. His voice was polite, but there was no warmth in it. Evan. One moment. Daniel simply nodded, letting the silence stretch. He could hear the rain battering the glass doors behind him, the faint clink of glasses from the bar, and somewhere close by, the whir of the espresso machine steaming milk. This was the moment he always paid attention to, the first 30 seconds. Because in those seconds, a guest decided whether they felt welcome or merely processed. and Daniel could already sense which way this check-in was leaning. What Evan didn't know, not yet, was that this ordinary rain-soaked traveler in front of him had designed the very counter he was leaning on, chosen the marble pattern in front of him, and signed the contract that put that gold name tag on his chest. And before the night was over, Evan was going to find that out in a way he'd remember for the rest of his career. Evan's fingers danced over the keyboard with a kind of restless efficiency, the blue light from the monitor catching the edge of his jawline. He leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing at the screen as lines of reservation data scrolled past. The computer made a faint click, click, click as he tabbed through different windows. Daniel stood quietly, one hand resting on the worn leather handle of his duffel. He knew better than to interrupt. He'd spent enough nights in hotel lobbies to understand that desk clerks often had to juggle multiple systems. But something about Evan's manner was off. There was no, "How was your trip?" No, "I'll just pull up your booking, Mr. Carter." It was the absence of small courtesies that caught Daniel's attention. Finally, Evan leaned back in his chair and exhaled through his nose. Not loudly, but in a way that carried just enough resignation to be heard. "Evan, I'm not seeing a reservation for tonight under Carter. Did you book online?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, through your website, about a week ago." Evan's brows drew together, his eyes flicking between two windows on the screen. "Sometimes these things don't come through correctly if the booking's done through a third party." Daniel's voice was steady. "It wasn't a third party, it was direct. I can pull up my confirmation email for you right now." The clerk gave a small, dismissive shake of his head. "If it's not in our system, sir, there's nothing I can do. We're pretty full tonight. Big conference in town. Half the city's booked." Daniel studied him. There was no offer to check the date in case of a typo. No attempt to search by credit card number or email address. Just a wall. "Could you check under another name?" Daniel asked. "Sometimes my assistant books under the company account." Evan's lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced at the screen, tapped twice, and shook his head again. "Number nothing under Carter or your company name." Daniel took out his phone, swiping to the email app. "All right, I'll give you the confirmation number." Evan held up a hand, palm out. "Sir, the system's the system. If it's not here, I can't check you in under that rate." He leaned back in his chair slightly, adopting the tone of someone reciting a well-practiced line. "We do have a couple of smaller rooms left, but since it would be considered a walk-in," his fingers tapped the keys again, "that would be $479 for the night." Daniel let the number hang in the air a second. It was more than double the usual price for a standard queen room at this property, even during peak season. He didn't respond right away. Evan filled the silence. "Look, it's conference week. Rates go up, supply and demand." Daniel's eyes drifted to the polished counter between them. He could still picture the day he'd chosen this exact slab of veined marble for its understated elegance. The irony of standing here, being offered a walk-in rate at a place he built, was not lost on him. Still, he kept his tone neutral. "So, your policy is to tell a guest with proof of a reservation that they can either pay twice the price or leave?" Evan's smile was polite in a way that felt mechanical. "Sir, you might think you have a reservation, but unless I see it here," he tapped the monitor with a single finger, "I can't honor it. We've had people try to take advantage before." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Take advantage?" The clerk hesitated, then leaned in just a fraction, lowering his voice in a way that was meant to sound discreet but only sharpen the edge. "We're the Grand Crest. We cater to CEOs, high-profile clients, people who expect a certain standard. I'm just saying, we have to be careful about who we check in." It was subtle, but the meaning was clear. Daniel was wearing travel-worn clothes, his duffel was functional rather than flashy, and he'd walked in from a rainstorm alone. In Evan's eyes, that didn't match the image of a Grand Crest guest. Daniel let a moment pass, watching the younger man. He'd heard this kind of thinking before, sometimes from competitors, sometimes from his own staff, though never for long. And while he'd learned not to take it personally, he knew how damaging it could be to the brand he had built on the promise of every guest is welcome. He straightened slightly, his voice calm. "Evan, I'll give you the confirmation number." If it's not in your system, fine, but I'd appreciate if you could check with your manager before telling me there's nothing you can do. Evan's eyes flicked toward the office behind the desk, then back. Manager's busy with a VIP check-in. I wouldn't want to interrupt them over something the system already tells me. Daniel took a slow breath, the way one does before deciding whether to let a small fire burn or put it out immediately. The test, it seemed, had begun sooner than expected. The lobby seemed to grow quieter around them, even though the jazz trio in the bar kept playing their slow, smoky tune. It wasn't that the music stopped. It was that the tension at the front desk was pulling focus. Daniel could sense the couple behind him in line shifting their weight, exchanging small glances that said, "Should we wait or come back later?" He didn't turn around. His attention was on Evan, who sat comfortably in the confidence of someone who thought the conversation was nearly over. Daniel. Evan, let me ask you something. If I read you the confirmation number right now, would that help? Evan's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a beat, then retreated. He gave a small, practiced smile, the kind hotel staff sometimes use when they're declining a request, but want to soften the refusal. Evan. Sir, I'm sure you think you have a reservation, but unless it's in our system, it's as good as non-existent. That's just how it works. Daniel held his gaze. And you're certain there's no way to check beyond this screen? Evan. We've already had people tonight claiming they booked rooms they never paid for. I can't risk putting someone in a suite without verified information. There it was again. The word risk, as if Daniel was some kind of gamble to the hotel. He kept his tone level, though inside, the professional part of him was taking notes. No attempt to verify through alternate lookup. No offer to check with reservation support. No escalation to a supervisor. Every step was an opportunity to show care, and every step was being skipped. Daniel. I see. And if I were to accept one of these smaller rooms at the walk-in rate, what would that be? Evan leaned back in his chair, turning the screen slightly toward himself, as if shielding it. The clatter of keys was quick, decisive. Standard queen, $479, plus tax. Daniel took a slow breath, letting the number hang in the air. He thought about the countless guests who had walked up to a Grand Crest desk over the years. The business travelers on tight schedules, the honeymoon couples, the families trying to keep kids from melting down after a long flight, and how moments like this could turn the promise of luxury into a memory of frustration. Daniel. That's quite a difference from what I booked. Evan gave a small shrug, almost imperceptible. Conference week, supply and demand. The people coming in now are willing to pay it. Behind Daniel, a woman coughed softly, trying to make it sound like nothing, but it was enough to remind him they had an audience. The bellman near the doors was glancing over now, his hands resting on a brass luggage cart. Even Lydia, the concierge, had paused mid-conversation with a guest, her eyes flicking to the desk. Daniel considered ending it here, flashing his credentials, explaining exactly who he was, and letting the awkwardness do the rest. But there was more value in letting this play out. He wanted to see not just how Evan acted in the moment, but how far he would carry the assumptions that were guiding his choices. Daniel. All right, he said finally. One night. Standard queen. Walk-in rate. Evan's shoulders eased slightly like a man who'd closed a minor dispute on his own terms. Very good, sir. He typed quickly, swiped a plastic keycard through the encoder, and slid it across the counter without ceremony. Elevators are just past the lobby bar, to your right. Enjoy your stay. Daniel took the keycard, turning it over once in his fingers, before slipping it into his pocket. Daniel. Thank you, Evan. It was the kind of thank you that didn't require a smile. As he stepped away, he could feel the curious eyes on his back. The couple in line leaned forward, speaking to Evan in lowered voices. The bellman turned to open the door for a new arrival, but not before casting Daniel a brief, puzzled look. Daniel didn't go to the elevators, not yet. Instead, he angled toward the far side of the lobby, where the lighting grew softer and the foot traffic thinned. There, near the concierge desk, was a familiar face, one that could help him turn this minor interaction into a valuable lesson for the entire property. And the lesson was going to begin before Evan had any idea what was coming. Daniel moved across the lobby with an unhurried step, the soft carpet swallowing the sound of his boots. He let his eyes wander, taking in details the average guest wouldn't notice. The way the flower arrangement at the center table was leaning slightly to one side, the faint smudge on the polished brass trim of the revolving door, the tiny chip in the marble near the concierge desk. All small things, but small things were the start of bigger patterns. Behind the concierge desk stood Lydia, sorting a fresh stack of brochures. She had been with the Grand Crest chain for years, long enough to recognize Daniel even when he wasn't in his owner role. Her uniform was impeccable, her hair neatly pinned, but it was her warm, unhurried manner that made her one of the property's strongest assets. She looked up, and her face brightened. "Mr. Carter, I didn't know you were coming in tonight," she said in a voice that managed to be both surprised and genuinely pleased. Daniel smiled, but his tone was deliberate. "I'm keeping this one quiet, Lydia. In fact, I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention to anyone, especially the front desk, who I am." Lydia's eyes narrowed just slightly, the way someone's do when they've already guessed there's a story behind the request. "Understood," she said simply. He leaned in a little, lowering his voice. "I just had an interesting check-in experience. I'd like to see how the rest of the staff handles me before I introduce myself properly." Lydia nodded once, almost like a soldier receiving orders. "Of course. Your suite is ready, the one on the 21st floor. I personally checked the new furnishings you approved last month." Daniel's smile softened. "Thank you, Lydia. I'll head up now." She slid him a keycard without even looking at the system. "Take this one instead of what they gave you. The other is for a standard queen. This is for your actual booking." Daniel took it, the card cool against his fingertips. "I owe you one." He crossed to the elevators, pressing the button and feeling the cool brass under his thumb. As he waited, he glanced back toward the front desk. Evan was leaning forward on his elbows, speaking to the couple who had been behind Daniel in line, his expression open and attentive, in a way it hadn't been for Daniel himself. It told Daniel exactly what he needed to know. The clerk could turn on charm, he just hadn't chosen to. The elevator doors opened with a quiet chime, and Daniel stepped into the mirrored interior. The ride to the 21st floor was smooth and silent, except for the faint hum of the cables. He watched his own reflection, damp hair curling slightly from the rain, the faint shadow of stubble, the travel-creased sweater. He didn't look like the magazine version of a luxury hotel owner, and that was exactly the point. The suite door opened with a soft click. Inside, warm light spilled over polished wood floors and rich fabrics. The balcony glass was fogged from the rain outside, and the muted city skyline glowed in the distance. He walked through the space slowly, inspecting. The new armchairs were perfectly placed. The linen smelled fresh. The welcome tray held a small arrangement of dark chocolate truffles. He set his duffel on the luggage stand and took out his phone. With one thumb, he scrolled to Claire Nguyen in his contacts, the general manager of this property. He pressed call. She picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Carter, I didn't know you were coming in tonight." "That's intentional," Daniel said. His tone was calm, but there was steel under it. "I just checked in under a false impression. I'd like you to meet me in the lobby in 20 minutes. We'll be speaking with your front desk clerk together." There was a pause, not of resistance, but of someone recalibrating quickly. "Understood," Clara said. 20 minutes. Daniel ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and stood for a moment in the quiet of the suite. He could hear the faint hiss of the rain against the balcony glass, the muffled horns of traffic far below. The room smelled of cedar and citrus, a scent he'd chosen himself for the Grand Crest brand. He took off his jacket, smoothed the front of his sweater, and glanced in the mirror. His expression was calm, measured, the way it always was before a boardroom meeting where the other side didn't yet know what was coming. And in 20 minutes, neither would Evan. 20 minutes later, Daniel stepped out of the elevator, the soft carpet muffling his footsteps as he crossed the lobby. The rain outside had intensified again, streaking the tall glass panels with rivulets that shimmered under the streetlights. At the far end of the room, Clara Nguyen stood near the front desk, holding a leather-bound operations folder. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blazer, her posture radiating calm authority. When she spotted Daniel, she moved toward him with a composed smile, the kind that greeted CEOs, inspectors, and investors alike. Clara, Mr. Carter. Her voice was warm but pitched low, as if already aware that discretion was part of the performance tonight. Daniel, Clara. He returned the smile, a small, controlled curve of the lips. Shall we? Together they walked toward the desk. Daniel could feel the shift in the air as they approached. The subtle hush, the sideways glances from guests and staff, who recognized Clara as the general manager. Evan looked up mid-sentence while assisting another guest. The sight of Clara seemed to straighten his spine. Evan. Oh, Miss Nguyen. Is there something... Clara's tone was measured, almost gentle. Evan, I'd like you to meet Mr. Daniel Carter. Evan glanced at Daniel, his brows knitting for half a second in polite confusion. Pleasure to meet you, sir, he said automatically, extending a hand. Clara's next sentence was crisp, but not unkind. Mr. Carter is the founder and owner of the Grand Crest Hotels. The words landed like a weight on the counter between them. For a moment, Evan just stared. His handshake froze mid-motion. His eyes flicked from Daniel's travel-worn sweater to his face, then back to Clara, as if waiting for her to correct herself. Daniel, we've met already. His voice carried no anger, just a quiet certainty. About an hour ago, at this desk. Color rose in Evan's cheeks. First a faint flush, then a deeper red creeping toward his ears. The memory was catching up with him, and the realization of what he'd said, how he'd acted, was beginning to settle in. Behind Daniel, Lydia the concierge was watching from her station, her expression carefully neutral. The couple who had been in line earlier had reappeared from the lobby bar, drifting closer as if drawn by the gravity of the moment. Even the bellman had slowed his pacing near the doors, his hands resting lightly on the handle of the luggage cart. Daniel didn't rush. He let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone in earshot to register what was unfolding. Then, he extended his hand again, deliberately. Good to meet you properly this time, Evan. Evan took it, the handshake slightly damp, his grip uncertain. Sir, I didn't realize... Daniel gave a single nod. That's right, you didn't. There was no sting in his tone, only the plain truth, and somehow, that landed harder than anger ever could.